Welcome to Designer Tech. I'm Warwick. Let's have a look at the Unity input system package. I did a quick video about this about a year ago, but since I've tried again to use it and I've looked at the Unity documentation, we have a package that Unity makes, which is actually really good, quite powerful, flexible. You can do so many things with it. And the documentation is not so good and not so helpful. And I spent a whole day and didn't get a whole lot of progress. So since then, I've been researching it and I've prepared a whole bunch of notes. The link for the notes will be shared in the description below. So here we have a fresh project that does not yet have the input system installed. So let's go through the process from scratch to, hey, here's a character and it's moving and we can use the input system to control it. So first things first, okay, that doesn't help me. I've got to go to the Unity registry and we go looking for the input system. Come on, there it is. Hit install. Now this is good. So yes, I want to enable it, which will make it restart the Unity editor. And the reason why it's doing this, it's got to change the project settings to disable the old input system, the old input manager, which is the old solution that Unity had, which was built in. They disable that and enable or switch to the input system package instead. Okay, so now we should, if we look at packages, we should see, go, expand. Input system, there it is there. So that's all fine. Now this scene will be in here. Let's add another folder for code because we will make some code, and let's make another folder for input assets or input actions. So input action assets will go there. Okay, so let's first of all set up the scene, so that we could have something to control. This is going to be very rough. I'm just going to make a plane as a ground. I'm going to make it kind of big. And let's call it, okay, that's ground. I could change the color. I'm not going to bother to, yeah, I'm not going to bother. Okay, so let's now make a character and I'm going to give it, basically I'm going to make a sphere as the body of the character, and then I'm going to add I'm going to give the thing a nose. We'll use a capsule for the nose, right, and we'll drag that to be a child of the character. Now if we have a look at the, well, actually, first of all, let's have a look at the nose. Let's make this a 0.3 of its original size, rotated around X by 90 degrees. Now let's go to the character. If we zoom in on that, yeah, we can see it's, of course, at 0, so it's halfway through the ground. If we bring it up 0.5, it'll sit on the ground, which is nice. The capsule's smack in the middle, so we need to bring it out. We'll bring it out in Z. If I look down from on top, let's go to nose, and in the Z, try 0.5. Yeah, that's enough. So now we have a character with a nose that sticks out one end. It's not pretty, it's really basic, but it's enough for us to know which direction the character is looking. Okay, so we have our scene, we are set up. Let's make the input actions asset, and this will be for keyboard. Okay. Actually, you know what? That's a terrible name. Let's call it player control. Okay, so now if I double click on that, I'll get a panel to edit player control. We can put this thing in a few spots. So let's drag it down here. That's fine. Okay. So what are we doing here, right? We're creating an input action. We need to associate input devices, and then we need to map, we say we're going to map these devices to actions, and then the actions will be linked, that be like events that get triggered. So let's first of all we'll add a control scheme, and this one will be called keyboard. And then if I hit plus here, we've got this is a list of devices. So I'll add keyboard. Now it's possible to add like keyboard and mouse. And so I could call this keyboard and mouse if we wanted to use mouse for the look control, and we could do that later on. So now I have a keyboard control scheme. Now I can make this all control schemes. If we had multiple, then we could see all the mappings for all the control schemes. Now first of all, I need to add an action map. So we'll just call this is player control. That name doesn't really make a lot of difference. Okay, so now over here we need to set up an action. So let's call this, let's say we want to have two distinctly different types of control. We want to have an event for moving forward and backward, and then we want to have another event for rotating left and right. So the character basically can move forward and backwards, and then we can turn it left and right. And so by going forward and then turning it, we can make it move anywhere on the plane. Nice and simple. So let's call this forward, backward. Oops, let's get the D in there. I could hit F2, like function F2 key, to change the name, like in most other places in Unity. This binding here is completely useless. It's really unhelpful that Unity create that by default, but so we get rid of it. Now, what we want to do, it's a simple scheme, is because forward and backward happens on a plane, we can set this up as a vector 2 kind of input. And so to make that work, first of all, we've got this selected. I need to go over and change this from being a button input, which is just a very singular event. I clicked a button, right? That doesn't help us. We want a value. So if we change that didn't happen. Click. Okay, so now we have value. Change the control type to vector 2. That now means we can talk about vectors, right? We can have a vector control, vector kind of input. We want to control, up, down. We could actually control up, down, left, right in one place if we wanted to. But for the sake of, let's call it clarity, I'm just going to split it up and just do forward, backward, or up, down binding on one action, and I'm going to make a separate rotate action. Okay, so here I'm going to use WASD keys for this. So this will be forward and backward, just W and S keys. So WS keys. So that's our composite. So this represents a vector composite, which is why we now have 4 bindings underneath that. So if I hadn't gone and added 2D vector composite, then we wouldn't have had these 4 bindings. Right? These 4 bindings let us talk about vector, up, down, left, right. So we can move in a 2D plane. Okay, so we're going to map this to keyboard. So now we have usages. So we need to, hold on. Something funny. Action interactions, that should be fine. It's not showing. Keyboard, that's what I want. Now, by character map to key, that's fine. So now we go looking for W, right, for up. So that's it. We've bound W to up. Now for down, we click path. And so this is like a path, just like a directory and name, file name. That's the way this is set up. So you can actually navigate this. So you can see here we have different devices, but this control scheme only supports keyboard. So only keyboard should really work. So now we want to do character mapped. We want a W and S. So we've got to scroll down to S. So here we have these 2 bindings of W and S bound up and down. Okay, let's make another action. Make another, sorry, hold on. Yes, sorry, start again. Another whole action rather. This is the rotate action, is what I'm after. So the forward backward action is one whole action, and that'll link to, it'll be handled by one method, and that'll be called on forward backward. So that action just literally will always be about moving forward and backward, and rotate will be about, you know, rotating left and right. Again, we get this redonkulous empty binding, so get rid of that. It does not help us. I got to configure it first. Back to comp vector 2. Having configured that as a vector 2, now I can do, see how this didn't come up before? I have to configure it as vector 2 before I can add a 2D vector composite. Now I've done that, and we'll call this AD keys. AD keys, so WS up there, AD down here. Now we leave up and down alone. It's left and right that we want to configure. So left, and we go scrolling down for, it's A actually. A is left, and then right is D. So now we have W and S for up and down, or forward and backward, and we have AD for left, right. That's actually it. I should click autosave. So that means as we go, it saves the asset. Okay, that's it for this very simple WASD key binding. We're basically, that should be ready to go. Now let's add some C# code. Okay, I'm going to call this MotionInput, and this will be the thing that receives the input events and basically, you know, gets a sort of a delta, if you like, as in how much to move. Okay, so let's double click on it. So Visual Studio opens up. Get rid of the comments, they don't help us. We don't need update for this because it'll be driven by the input events themselves. We don't need an update method. Remember, the update method happens with every frame, but in this case, something else is going to drive events. Okay, so here, let's do two things. Let's give an add component menu. I like doing this when I write my own custom components. This makes it really easy to find the custom components, and a slash if you want to have, like, you can have a main menu when you add component, and it'll be add component, it'll come up with input example, and then you can go inside that and find things inside. So here we get the name of MotionInput, and then now we can find the MotionInput component inside input example. So it helps group things and makes it easier to add your own custom components. Now the other thing is we need, before I can do that, okay, stop. I have to use the namespace for the input system. And then from that, we can use the player input component. We can say the player input component needs to be added to the same game object as this component. So by doing this, it'll pull that in for us automatically. All we need is, we just need that to be present because it'll be the player input component that we add the input action asset, the one that we just defined. So that'll be associated with the player input component, and then the player input component will call methods on here. Now you might say, what methods will it call on here? It will call, actually, I think it'll work if it's private. So because we have, if we go back over here to the input action, it'll be based off this spelling, including case, right? It's very sensitive. So if I hit F2 and I can copy that and then go back to my code, and I can paste it, and then I need to put on. So on forward backward event, this will get called, and it will be given player value. Input value. It's input value. It'll be given input value. Okay. And what we can do here, we can do two things. Let's do a debug log of, actually I could do it like this. Paste. So that just lets us know that, helps us debug or be sure that this is working, that we've mapped it correctly. And the other thing we need to do is, okay, what we'll do, private vector2, forward, backward. And if we do serialized field, that will be visible in the editor, which helps us also see that it's working. And the other thing we can do, forward, backward, is we can make a property that's read-only. And that's a nice way of encapsulating it so other components can't break this. We need the same sort of thing for rotate. Call it rotation. And then over here we'll do the same thing, public vector2 rotation. Okay, so now we get the value of forward backward from here equals input.get. Because we've made the forward backward action a 2D vector, we can get vector2 values from it. So this is how we read that input. And the same thing for rotation. That's also, of course, if I click on rotate, remember this is private void on rotate input value. Okay. Debug.log, same thing on rotate. Rotation equals input.get. So again, the rotate is a vector2. If we go back over here to Unity, it's compiling that, so a bit slower. There we go. So rotate again is a vector2, which is why we can do that input.get value vector2 or input.get vector2. So this is basically ready. We don't really need the start. It's not doing anything for us. And that's our motion input. And at the very least, we can use this to debug, but we should be able to make another component that can read the values off here using these public properties. Okay, so let's go back to Unity. Clear out the noise there. It's just about character formatting, like line feed. So over here, if I do add, there's our input example special menu, motion input. Okay, that's automatically added the player input component, which is what, we had a require component, so that's pulled it in. Now we need to add our action input actions asset, player control. There it is, right, which is the one that we created over here. Now here default scheme, so this is your input, and see we've got keyboard. We can leave it as any, which means we could actually have multiple control schemes. And the default map is player control, right, which is this player control action map that it's referring to there. Okay, we should be good to go. So let's hit play and see if we get debug messages when I hit WS. And so you can see here that as I hit W, it's +1 and -1 when I hit S for down. If I do left, right, so A, we see on rotate, and here we're seeing X values different. Okay, so that's handling motion for us quite simply. So there we are. We've already very simply rigged up this character game object now to receive keyboard input. And the nice thing is through that those mappings, we could add other control types of control. Like we could add mouse, we could add PlayStation 4, gamepad control, or DualShock controller. So we can do all of that, and that's what's nice about the input system package. It's quite flexible. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's make another component, and this will be the motion controller. And this will actually work with the motion input. And what it'll do, I'll double click on it just to open it up. There we go. What this will do is it will use the values from the motion input to actually move our character around. So let's do similar things here. Add menu, input example. I think I had, yep, input example. Put them in the same menu. Name of MotionController. Yeah. Now the reason why I use the name of, if I refactor this, if I hit Control RR and refactor the name, then that'll be changed up here and it'll present. Whoops, put an L. It'll present correctly in the menu. Okay. The other thing we will ask, or we will require, is the motion input, which is already added. But if it weren't added, this would require it, and then that would in turn require the player input. So make sure all the dependencies are set up. Okay, now we need a private reference to the motion input. So motion input. And we need also a reference to the transform. Now, people might be used to using the lowercase transform property that game objects have, or the minor behavior provides access to. The problem with that is it tends to do a get component every time, and that's pretty inefficient. So I like to cache it instead. Input equals get component, motion input, and transform. Except this time we'll call it transform, including the F, equals get component transform. And I could have done this and cached it just once. I could have done that too, but I'm not going to. All right, now that means it's ready to go in terms of it's got the pieces it needs. The other thing we should do here is serialize field. Let's do a private float. Let's make some inspector editable fields or properties for speed in terms of the motion speed, movement, backward and forward. And let's also do the same thing for angular rotation. So this we can tune it in the editor. Okay, so here we have motion speed, and we can set a default. The other nice thing we can do is we can give a little header to sort of explain what everything is. So here we have movement speed in meters per sec, and we can make another header, and this will be angular rotation. In fact, rotation speed is probably, I can type it, speed in degrees per sec. Okay, serialized field, private float, angular speed, keep doing that. Let's default to 15 degrees per second. Okay, so now what we need to do here is we'll deal with the movement and then the rotation separately. So void move. I hate it does that. Okay. No sunshine, just move. Okay. So what we're going to do here, we'll have update called move and rotate. So let's just make these two methods. Okay. So here what we'll do is we'll get a float value of the delta movement. And that will be from input dot forward backward. So the forwardward. Okay, that's not helpful. Forwardward. Terrific. Yeah. And that's why refactoring is. The refactor ID stuff is good. Backward. Okay, so there's whether or not we're moving forward or backward. That's typically positive a 1 or negative 1 or 0. Now we need to multiply it by our motion speed and then by time.delta time, which makes it smooth, but also what's going on? Right. It's because this is a vector and we want the y component of that because we just want the forward backward part. So the time.delta time makes this, instead of meters per frame, which would be very fast, this makes it meters per second because the delta time is basically frames per second, roughly. Not exactly, but roughly. Good enough. Okay, so then here we need to use the transform.translate to actually move the object, not in the x direction, not in the y direction, we don't want to go up and down, but in the z direction. So there's delta movement, and that should move it forward and backward. And then down here we'll do a similar thing for rotation. Delta angle equals input rotation dot x. Remember it's x and y for left and right part of the vector times is a angular speed, yes, times same thing with time.delta time for same reasons. Transform again dot rotate. Now, okay, so think about, we've got the x, we've got 3 axes, right? So left-handed. So 3 axes. X would be pitch, like, well, anyway, let's not worry about pitch your thing, but basically it means it'll look forward or up, and that's not what we want. We want y, because y is when it looks, right and left. So 0 in x, in y it's delta angle, and then 0 around z, because z would be roll. Okay, now that gives us the move and rotate parts, and then over here we can just do that as an update. So every frame it'll check to see if there's any input, and it'll handle the change to position and rotation accordingly. And the good thing about this translate in the z direction, this is relative to where the component is pointing. So this works quite nicely, and that makes it fairly simple. If we go back to Unity, we click on the character, we now need to add the motion controller. Now before we do that, just notice here the player input has updated. It's got this behavior send messages, which is the default. Notice here it's saying it'll send messages to, there's a number of events, default ones, like on device lost, device regained. So this is if you plugged in a controller or removed it, like a PS4 controller. On controls change, so maybe the control mappings change. On forward backward, so that was that was an action we added, and then it's on rotate for the rotate action that we added, that we defined. So and this tells us, confirms that we've configured things correctly. We should, this is the method names we should add, which we have in our motion input. Now we need to add input example, the motion controller. Here we've got our speeds that we can tune, and you can see here the headings. If we hit play, and yep, we can move it up and down, and if I do left and right, we can see it's rotating. It's a bit slow. 15 degrees per second is probably a bit rough. We'll make it 60 degrees per second. Okay, now that won't save. When I stop, that'll go away, that setting, because we're in play mode already. So we can see that's working fairly well, and I can actually use the W and S keys at the same time I'm doing A and D. So you can do both at the same time, which is nice. So I can stop that. Let's make it 60 and save it in. If I say let's make it 10, make it twice as fast in the movement. Save and hit play. It should be really responsive now. Oh yeah, it's nice and fast. Okay, we can see here in the game window, it's working well. So now we have a basic character that we can control with very simple keyboard controls. So what happens if we want to add another kind of controller, right? What happens if we want to add PS4 control, via USB? And this is where the input system really shines. We don't have to change any code at all, which is excellent. All we need to do is add some more mappings. Okay, so here in the control schemes, if I add a control scheme and I call it PS4 controller, and then I hit plus, and then down here under gamepad, PS4 controller. I thought this was just a heading. I didn't realize this is actually what I want. iOS obviously is not what I want. I'm running Windows, not iOS. So PS4 controller. I hit save. Now it's filtering for PS4 controller. Now that's enter all devices. Okay, so here we can filter which devices we want to see the actions for. So now we basically go through a similar process here. We still want just these two actions because we have the same two events that we're dealing with, which is move forward or backward or rotate. Nothing's going to change there. On the controller, let's use the left stick for forward and backward, and we'll use the right stick for turning left and right, just to show that we can. Okay, so on forward and backward, we hit plus. We want to add another 2D vector composite for the exact same reasons as before. Down here, that's funny that comes up. Anyway, that's fine. Oh, it's showing all devices here. Okay, good. So here we want to do for the forward and backward, it's the left stick. So left joy, let's call it. Now in the up, we can actually, instead of all, okay, right, there we go. Excellent. Start again. Okay, so let's add, okay, that was so unnecessary. The asset editor is a little strange at times. All right, it's the left joy. I'll just collapse that and pretend it's not there. Okay, so it's the left joy we want to mess with. So up, I click. Now, first of all, let's see. Yes, so first of all, this is the other thing. We want to use this input scheme, the PS4. So now I need to, this is showing us the keyboard one, so I have to navigate back. So when they say path, it's like a path of all devices. So this is still keyboard, click back. Now we've got all the devices. And here we have gamepad. And then so under gamepad here, it's the left stick up. We want to map the left stick, like I said, left joystick for up and down, being forward and backward. So there we've mapped up binding to the up, gamepad up. And then down here for down. That was kind of a pun, but by accident. So here we'll do down. And notice here, we actually had the option of using the gamepad, the D-pad. So we could have used this D-pad thing over on the left, but that's okay. We're using joysticks. Joysticks are fun. Okay, so we still have left stick down, so it's left stick for the left joy. Let's go down to rotate and add another 2D vector composite, and we'll call that right joy. Now, ignoring up and down, we're going for left and right. So left, path, we go to the, now we want the right stick, right? This is the right joystick. So we want left, and we go down to right. This time we use the right. So now we've got left and right mappings or bindings, again on PS4 controller. That is it. And that should have auto-saved as we went. That basically should work. So now if I hit play and grab my joystick, and if I use the right joystick, the right key, okay, yep, okay, right's not happening, but left is happening. What went wrong? Why? Because I chose the wrong, okay, fine. Stop. And this is why it's good to have the debug messages while you're playing with the stuff. So I messed up. I chose the left stick. I needed to scroll further down. And for the right, I want to map it to the right stick, right direction. Right, so that's when using the right stick and you push the right stick in the right direction. That's what this means. Okay, let's try that again. Let's clear the messages. Hit play. Okay. If I do left, we see left. If I do right, okay, that's working. So you get seeing messages come up and we see it auto rotating. So all very good. And we can also see here in the vector on the rotation, right, in the X values, you can see -1 and +1. So this again confirms for us. Now I haven't tried moving forward and backward, and that works pretty nicely as well. So now I can use the joystick and I can move it around and I can rotate and I can do stuff. So now we have PS4 controller or keyboard, both supported for the same character. And there are ways of using the APIs for the input system to select. So you could make it through a menu. You could let the user select which input system they want. So up here we have default scheme. So you can actually make it, I could choose keyboard here, right? And then if I hit play, okay, this should only listen to the keyboard input scheme. So now the keyboard's making it move. Perfect. Now if I grab the PS4 controller and wiggle it, oh, hang on, it's doing auto switch. Okay, hold on. Turn off auto switch. Let's try that again. Okay, so now it's not doing it. Okay, but with the keyboard, it is. And joystick does nothing. If I actually, while it's playing, if I switch to PS4, no, I have to stop. It sort of doesn't refresh. PS4, and now the PS4 can control it. Okay, and then if I use the keyboard, nothing. So there are ways to make it, you know, that menu control kind of scheme, you know, situation you'd have in a lot of games where, you know, so this can be done through a and here can be any, and any should let it, we don't have to worry about auto switch. Any should let anything happen. Should, maybe auto switch is needed for that. Interesting. Okay, keyboard's working, joystick isn't. Interesting. If I put auto switch back on and hit play, keyboard's working, and now joystick is. So auto switch is needed. Oh, it's default scheme. Okay, yeah, okay. So there we go. So that is an introduction to to using and setting up the input system. Just to give you an idea of what I was struggling with originally. This is the Unity documentation for the package. So actually, I'll go back to Unity. So in Unity, if I go back to the package manager, and for where are you? Input system, if I hit view documentation, that's what I get. And then I go to guides, quick start guide, thinking, let's get going, get me going, come on. This is where the problem came in, and I spent a whole day sort of trawling through this. I got something very hacky almost working, but it wasn't good. And this is the reason for this video, and also why I created a some content on GitHub to actually explain all this in this video, right? So here we've got, they're talking about okay, a number of options, getting input directly from a device, and they show that, but this is not flexible, right? Here it's not easy to add, you know, PS4 joystick or mouse or whatever. This is, you change a whole lot of code every single time. Then they talk about the player input, which is the basis for that flexibility, but they sort of explain, okay, how you might create an action, input action asset. You can do it this way. Okay, terrific. They give you an idea of what a whole asset looks like that's finished. They don't tell you how to set it up. And then they don't really tell you how to handle events from it. And they don't tell you what that code should look like. And then they go on to something else with a callback context, which I think is for these events. And this doesn't make that much sense. In fact, I think I tried this and couldn't get this working either, a couple of weeks back. So this was not helpful at all for me. And so I have since created, where is it? This one in GitHub. How to Unity input system. I've used their installation. There's their quick start, but that's not very good. In their manual, the install is actually okay, but I've created a getting started page here. It tells you about how to go through the whole process that I've just done. So here, like for installation, creating a basic character. So this makes the scene that I did before with the sphere and the capsule nose. Here we have creating the motion input, right, with the code fragments, and explains the different things and why we're doing them and how to create the input action asset. Right, so in detail, step by step, and then at this point you should be able to debug it and see it working, right? See the messages. Then next we make the motion controller. Again, fragments of code explaining why I'm doing things like adding component menu, and again, the different fields we need or properties and how to calculate things. Okay, and at this point that should work. And then adding a separate arrow key mapping. So you might use WASD and you might want arrow keys. So here's how you add the arrow keys as a separate set of bindings. And then finally, how to add the PS4 DualShock controller input. So this documentation explains all that in detail if you couldn't sort of follow along from the video. And I'll put the link to this in the description below. Thank you for watching. Happy hacking with Unity.